Welcome to this lecture. In the last lecture, we understood about the basic of Apache Spark. In today's lecture, we are going to focus more about the collections. We'll discuss about what is Spark RDD, what is Spark Dataframe, what is narrow transformations, wider transformations, and try to understand what is DAG. We're also going to understand some of the basic concept of Spark using a programming language and some examples. Let's look at what is RDD. RDD stands for Resilient Distributed Dataset. You can see RDD as the primary data structure in the Spark. So let's take an example and let's try to understand what is RDD and how it is used. Let's say we are reading some sort of file. So in that file there must be some sort of content, and how that content is going to store when we are working with Spark. So RDD is the collection which stores the data which resides inside a file, a database, or any other platform. If it is a streaming application, whatever data comes in will primarily get stored into RDD, and all your business logic transformations you are going to perform on top of RDD. So you can assume RDD as the primary collection of data which you are trying to read using a Spark programming. RDD was primarily user-facing API in Spark since its inception. At the core, an RDD is an immutable distributed collection of elements of your data. Now, what does it mean by immutable? Immutable means that let's say by some sort of you lose your data from the RDD, RDD has the capability to recreate the entire lineage of that RDD and you won't be able to lose the data. So let's say your node got failed in between or your cluster got failed in between. RDD will recreate itself and your data which is holded over that specific partition of RDD will be recreated, and you don't need to do anything specifically to recreate the data. Partitioned across nodes in your cluster that can be operated in parallel with a low level of API. RDD supports transformations and actions. Now transformations and actions are again a very big topic in Spark, and we are going to deep dive into that in the later sections. Now let's look at the history of Spark API. So when Spark first introduced, RDD was the core collection which uses and handles the data which we read through the file or any database system. So in 2011 RDD was introduced. Later on, there are some modifications happen on top of RDD and which make RDD more powerful and more intelligent. That called as a Dataframe, which comes into 2013, which collects your data as a raw object, which has logical plans and optimizer by itself, which is efficient and fast in terms of an RDD. Later on, we have a dataset as well, which came into 2015, which has much more capabilities and having the inheritance attributions of RDD as well as the Dataframe. Now as we first step into Apache Spark and try to understand some collections, it is best time to look at some examples and try to understand how it works behind the scene. Now here we are into my IDE where I have written couple of codes to make you understand about each and every single concept of Spark. To start with, first of all, let's try to understand how Spark is implemented. So to use Spark, you have two different options. One is that you install your Spark in your local machine and then you use it into IDE, or you can go to any specific cloud-based application or a service, and from there you can trigger an instance which holds the Spark implementation, which supports the Spark implementation. So here for this specific session, we are going to do all the program locally. We can also try to see Spark execution in the interactive sessions. Now what is interactive session? So whatever you try to perform in your command line operations or from your terminal. So to give you an example, let's go into our terminal. And here, let's say if I do Spark shell, Spark will create an environment and will give me an object of Spark by which I can read a file. As you can see here, My Spark is triggered and allocated a memory on a specific node which is with port of 4040. It also created a Spark context object which you can use by specifying an instance of SC. If you want to work with Spark session, you have a Spark as an object which you can use and try to perform. Now let's don't get confused with Spark context and Spark session at this point. We will cover this topic in depth in the later sessions. This is the interactive session. You can start writing a code it here and Spark will help you to generate the output. For this lecture, we are not going to work on interactive sessions. Rather, we are mainly going to do all our code in IDE, and that by that way you will be able to understand it more clearly. For this entire lecture, we are going to use Pyspark, which is Python plus Spark. So if you wanted to implement Pyspark in your code, and if you wanted to start with Spark, you just need to install a Pyspark package in your Python package manager. So if you try that, you will get to know that Spark version is available using a Python module. So here I have already installed it, so it is not giving me any option to install, but in your case, let's say here one option will come as an install. As it is installed, let's get started with the code. Now let's understand what this code is. So the first one, what we are doing here is we are creating a Spark session. Let's understand all the things in the later sections. Just to give you an idea, a Spark session, a Spark object can be created from a Spark session, which is eventually imported from a pyspark.sql package. When you say Spark session and builder, and along with that some options, get or create, you will eventually going to get a Spark session. Here we are simply trying to read one CSV file and we are trying to collect it into one of the collections. So to read a file, it is very specific format, which is we need to use spark.read.option and then header.true. That means I want to read the file with the header as well, which is my column names, and then I need to specify the path. And if I show my collection.show, it should give me some output which is I recently read from this CSV file. Let's give it a try. As you can see here, my Spark code read the CSV file and printed some data here. Simple, right? What do you need to do? You simply need to instantiate a Spark object, give that which kind of a file you wanted to read, and give the file name. And there are some options which you can give as an optional parameter. We are going to look at each of the options in depth in later sections. This is just for the example and to make you understand that how Spark initially work and read a file. The same way we can read a JSON file, which is here. What you need to do, you just need to implement the same thing, but instead of CSV you need to write a JSON file. As you can see here, it will give you the object written. Let's execute this one as well and try to understand. As you can see here, I am performing a count operation on top of the RDD, which is eventually the collection which I am handling here. So if we read it, we are going to get the total number of count which is present inside a file. Same way, if you don't want the print, what you can do is you can simply open the show method and it will bring the default first 20 records for you. Okay, you can read a Parquet file format, right? And you can do multiple things on top of it. Let's spark the understanding of Parquet file for the later sections. I hope by now you are a bit of clear with the understanding that how specifically Spark works and it reads the file. Don't worry about all the methods available for the data frame in Spark. We are going to cover each and every single one in the transformations and action lectures. Rest of the things you can rely and try to understand that how Spark works.